Hello again. This is Terry Martin, and we're broadcasting here from Gordon, a treat concerning a very exciting piece of poetry which comes from the Psalter in the Old Testament. It was the late MacDonald Carey who made, in 1966, in April of 1966, made the following lines legendary. And I quote, "Like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives." End of quote. And for a number of years, from 1966 to 1994, this would be the intoned line that would introduce that program that became so famous, that series that became so famous. Of course, after Carey's passing, the decision was made to remove the second part of the opening out of respect for him and his family. Why is it that the days of our lives are so crucial? It is said that there was a time in our history when mechanical clocks only had one hand, and people were content to look at a clock with only one hand because it would count down the hours. But as time went, we know that we have become more consumed with the second and the second hand on the clock. Or should I say the first hand on the clock, with the minutes and the seconds that tick away? Because there was a day when we reckoned time by means of an hourglass. And probably prior to that, the sundial. Quite happy just to watch the sun rise and then the sunset. And that would be a day. Well, today we have become obsessed with nanoseconds. And our salaries are composed or determined by punching in and punching out. And the famous last words for many is, "You're late." As one has said, this line has become an ulcer-producing accusation. You're late. How do we get here? We know that time is crucial, time is important. But this whole thing about measuring time has consumed so many. It was the physicist Stephen Hawking of Cambridge University who wrote his best-selling book, or a best-selling book on the topic, entitled A Brief History of Time. And in that book, he shows the connection between time and the three other dimensions of matter. For example, he said that the faster an object moves, the shorter it becomes, and the slower time passes for the object. It's what we call time dilation. And it is said that if time would stand still for a person traveling at the speed of light, time would stand still. So the discovery of many of these theories and these laws have made us very curious about time. But isn't it amazing? All of us have it. Our bank, our time bank gets renewed every morning. Some of us would wish our bank accounts would do that, refresh and renew with 24 Rand or 24,000 every morning. But time replenishes. And when we look at this book of poetry, 150 poems put together over a number of years, going all the way from the reign of David, David's early beginnings, all the way to the exile of the southern kingdom, right into the post-exilic times when they finish up in exile, or as they finish up in exile. So these psalms are composed, and the oldest psalm, of course, is Psalm 90. Because you see, this book of the Psalms is quite significant. Well, not just quite significant, very, very significant. Because the book really is about how God is king. And the 150 poems are recounting how, in symphonic form, these psalms become expressions of survival of the king and his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, how it survives on earth as it is in heaven. And that could be the overriding or overarching idea running through all 150. A symphony that shapes the survival of God's king and his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And that's the storyline that is tracked through these 150 poems in poetic form. Because you see, poetry captures the intensity of emotion. Or why is it then that when people are deeply in love, a man with a woman with a man, they break out into poetic lines? Because it captures emotional intensity like prose does not. And so as we look at these Psalms, they are grouped into 5 books across the Psalter. And each of the books angles for a particular view of the king and his kingdom. And there are 5 groupings. For example, 1 to 41, 42 to 89, and so on. And so our psalm falls in the 4th block, the 4th book of these 5 groupings, where the emphasis in those psalms is on, wow, yeah, you better be careful, and you need to be looking out for what God is uniquely doing, right? Because your survival depends on it. You need to hold on. You need to keep on holding on. Don't let go. Because in order to survive, you need to focus. But you're going to take shots as you look at surviving. You may fumble, you may fall, you may stumble, but you need to keep on holding on. And so Psalm 90 and Psalm 91 become the sentinel psalms of book number 4. They stand at the gateway. In a sense, they become sentries to this section of the psalm, because they look at, Psalm 90 in particular looks at a very particular incident. I think you can make a clear case for the incident in the life of the Hebrew people, because the psalm is attributed to Moses. Moses, the man of God. That's what it says in Psalm 90. That's the superscription. And then Deuteronomy has the same words. Moses, the man of God, in Deuteronomy 33. So there are suggestions and inklings angling for an event in the life of the people of God where there is great stumbling, is great sin, and the consequences of that sin is recounted. And here you have 17 verses chock full of high emotion intensity. That's how I would put it. High emotional intensity. Because you see, in our lives, this drive for success somehow has the making of the pattern for a nervous breakdown. And if you've never had your cage rattled because you are trying to grope for success in ways that are extending you beyond the limits that God has designed for human life and human flourishing, it's amazing what happens in your own world. And so the situation is the sin at Kadesh Barnea. Remember that 12 spies are sent into the land because there are 12 tribes in Israel. And they come back, and 10 of the spies say no, and 2 say go. The 10 say, we can't take the land. We look like grasshoppers in the eyes of the giant clans in the land. And 2 of them say, hey, we can go. We can take it. We can take the land. And that's good old Josh and Caleb. And so about 1.2 million people die across a 38-year window. And this is quite devastating because it means that annually about 35,500 people die, which turns out to be about 87 people every single day. Just imagine that. 87 funerals per day because of the sin at Kadesh. Why does this happen? Why did it happen? Because of unbelief. And this psalm orients us to how to make the days of our lives count. Not to count the days, but to make the days count. The days of our lives are like sand in an hourglass. How do we use them? Well, there are 3 words that come to mind. First one is transcendence, verse 1 to 6. The second one is imminence, verse 7 to verse 12. And from 13 to 17, the word abundance. Transcendence. In relation to eternity, our days are short because you see, eternity trumps time. Eternity trumps my temporality. And in verse 1 to verse 6, the writer becomes very clear as to why eternity trumps time. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Dwelling place? God is our refuge. He's our hiding place. He's our safety and security. We take flight to Him. And across the Psalms, you have that idea. It's peppered across the Psalms. Psalm 71, verse number 3. Be to me a rock of refuge to which I continually come. You have given the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. Sounds like Deuteronomy 23 again. Verse number 9 of the same psalm. Do not cast me off in the time of old age. Forsake me not when my strength is spent. Because that is where the psalmist is going to go as the lines of the poem progress. So when we contrast God's eternity with man's brevity, our best we can do is to pray for God's favor across the days of our lives. His eternality trumps time. Before the mountains were brought forth, verse 2, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Now that's how big this God is, how big and wide His vast domain. Think of that very old hymn, that ancient hymn by Isaac Watts. O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. Because you, verse 3, return man to dust and say, and here's the quotation, return, O children of man. Because, verse 4, 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Now, watch how the writer describes time in relation to eternity. He says 1,000 years is but as yesterday in your sight. Or as a watch in the night. A watch in the night was approximately about 4 hours. If you look at Judges 7:19, it refers to the middle watch. It suggests 3 periods, a 3-period session or section. 4 hours. That's how short our life is. 1,000 years, like one day. And the measurement of time, of course, is a human artifact. Have you ever wondered why animals don't stress over time and growing old? Your pet bird doesn't. Your pet dog doesn't. Have you ever seen them look at their arm? They're keeping time. And yet you and I do that all the time. The fact that God has divided his work into 24-hour days shows that he wants us to regulate our work in a manner like that. Peppered with rest. Oh, how we overextend ourselves. What we call for worthy causes. It reminds me of that hymn. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me. Because the Lord is the one who sweeps them away as a flood. They are like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning. In the morning it flourishes and is renewed, and in the evening it fades and withers. He doesn't change, but we change. And we are in the process of growing older. Something which we just generally don't bargain for until we get there. And you can't strike a deal with old age and say, old age, treat me well as I grow older. Some of us wish we could do that. Some of us wish we'd never have wrinkles and crinkles and aches and pains. As we say, baldness, bunions, and blindness. Can't see that well. Eye starts falling out. Our feet ain't working that well anymore either. Well, the poet goes on in 7-12 and he says, while eternality trumps temporality, because the days of my life is short. Notice the second idea. Depravity pervades my humanity because the days of our lives are sorrowful. Verse 7. For we are brought to an end by your anger. By your wrath we are dismayed. There it is. The idea of death. We are brought to an end by your anger. That's a hard one. You can choke on that one. Why is death coming on us? Because we are consumed in God's anger, and these Old Testament peoples of God, these persons, stood under God's wrath. And so they were hurried away in untimely death. And this is Moses' own observation of what happened at Kadesh. But why death? Verse 8, you have set our iniquities before you and our secret sins in the light of your presence. Here's why. God's eyes are on all our ways. Jeremiah chapter 16, a very challenging verse, a verse that gets us to, in a sense, sit upright. 16:17. For my eyes are on all their ways. God says, they are not hidden from me, nor is the iniquity concealed from my eyes. No hiding place, no place to hide from God when it comes to our iniquity. It's Luke 12 verse 2 that says, there is nothing covered up that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. It was Louis Perry Chafer who said in such a crushing kind of way, secret sins on the earth is open scandal in heaven. Secret sin on earth is open scandal in heaven. Because God's word, Hebrews 4:12, the word of God is alive and powerful. It's active. It's the Rhema word. It is sharper than any two-edged sword. And what does it do? It cuts to the chase. It cuts into the inner recesses of our being, piercing as far as the division of soul and spirit, and joints and marrow, and able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And now the killer. There is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Because the writer to the Hebrews to no longer remain Hebrews, because they were standing in danger of defecting, going back to the old way, going back to Torah, going back to Moses, rather than clinging to Christ, holding fast their confession. Cling to him. Cling to Jesus. Hold on to him. Because the word of God can catch you out and can discern the innermost thoughts of your being and in your being, and can detect whether unbelief is a settled persuasion in your heart. Because the danger in the book of Hebrews, the danger of falling away is predicated upon unbelief. Not just a particular act that you do, it is unbelief. You come into this thing by grace through faith. You are kept by grace through faith. If you don't watch it, there's no sin that can separate you, but your unbelief, it can cause you very, very dangerous and serious problems. The power of sin is in his secrecy, in its secrecy. Secret sin on the earth is open scandal in heaven. Now verse 9. All our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. Oh, I hear so many people sighing. That's all I hear. Sighing. Our plans, our operations pass away under God's wrath. And then verse 10, the years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Original text says, we consume our lives with a groan. King James Version says, with a tail, T-A-L-E. Sin's impact on our life is such that our lives are terminated with the exhalation of our final breath. A sad state of affairs, because we aren't keeping short accounts with God. It is said that the average American in his lifetime or her lifetime will spend 6 months sitting at stoplights. This comes from a survey of about 6,000 people polled in 1988 in the new U.S. News and World Report of January 30, 1989. 6 months sitting at stoplights, 8 months opening junk mail, 1 year looking for misplaced objects. I chuckled with this one because the older we grow, the more we can't remember where we put stuff. 1 year looking for misplaced objects, 2 years unsuccessfully returning phone calls, 4 years doing housework, 5 years waiting in line. And maybe in our own context, it's waiting in line a lot longer than just 5 years. And 6 years eating. Wow. All important things, we would agree. But watch where we spend our time. You see, the words of that song of yesteryear is so potent. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away to that land of God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. And initially, life seems so long. You were a teenager not too long ago. Watch where you sit now. Life is short. Or have you not heard it or said it yourself? Where's the time gone? This is the difference between looking at time from the beginning and viewing it from the end. Now, here's an interesting exercise as we look at verse number 12. Let's read verse 12 first. So, in view of transcendence, in view of immanence, the transcendence of God's eternality, which trumps temporality, the immanence that we experience because our lives are not only short, but they are sorrowful, and that what we experience is our depravity pervading our humanity. In light of all of that, the psalmist says, teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Gain a heart of wisdom. Don't just count the days, but make the days count. By going after wisdom, by reaching for wisdom, because you can't buy love. You can't buy wisdom. Teach us to number our days. Here's the interesting exercise. If 1,000 years is as a day, then 70 years is as 1 hour and 40 minutes. An intense 1 hour and 40 minute, an intense window of time in relation to 1,000 years being as a day. 80 years is as 1 hour, 55 minutes. 86 years as 2 hours, 4 minutes. 1 month is 7 seconds. 21 years is 30 minutes. I was playing around with that many, many years ago, and now I said that late 60s. And you say, wow, where's the time gone? So here's an exercise for you. How old are you now? Write that down. Number 1, I am X years old. Number 2, how long would you like to live? X amount of years, X number of years. Write it down. Now, number 3, what's the difference between the length of time you'd like to live? Subtract from that your present age. How many years do you have left? Now, multiply the years by 360 days, and then multiply it again by 24 hours, and then by 60 minutes, and then by 60 seconds. It's a very sobering exercise when you figure out how much time is left. Notice I say how much time, not how little, how much time is left. So much to do, so little time. I remember as a child watching a movie, probably 11, 12 years old. It was entitled The Unfinished Task, about a missionary who's on his deathbed and saying, so little time and so much to do. The unfinished task. By the time you've left, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to sit, soak and sour and mope because you're growing old? Right? Or are you going to rise up and do what God brings your way? It is interesting that in 2 Samuel chapter 19, from 35 to 39, there's an old man who speaks to David. His name is Barzillai. And he says to David, "Hey, Dave, I'm now 80 years old. Can I distinguish between good and bad?" Verse 35 of chapter 19. "Or can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Or can I hear any more the voice of singing men and women? Why then should your servant, be an added burden to my lord, the king? Your servant would merely cross over the Jordan with the king. And why should the king compensate me with his reward? Please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and mother." He's resigned himself to a life that is fast coming to an end, fast closing. Now, I want you to compare that with what Caleb says to Joshua. In the book of Joshua, good old Josh comes to Caleb and says, "Hey, Caleb, you're 85 years old. What do you want me to do for you? Ask anything and I will do it." And good old Caleb, still standing upright in that very mellow, mature voice, says, "Please give me the hills of the Anakim." If you know anything about the hills of the Anakim, it's the hill where the giant clans live. Give me the hills. My goodness gracious me. At 85, when most of us will be reaching for the rocking chair or the walking stick, this man says, "Give me the hills of the Anakim." You see, time is an inexplicable raw material. And with it, all is possible. Without it, nothing is possible. As I said, time is that one commodity that replenishes every 24 hours. We open our purses, our time capsules, and we discover 24 hours. What you going to do with it? Teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. Return, O Lord. How long? Have pity on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Because our life is short and life is filled with sorrow, we can still experience the abundance of God in the morning and when the night shadows fall. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants and your glorious power to their children. There's the transgenerational element to our kids. May they see the blessing of God because of our faithfulness. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. You see, we live as if we could kill time, as Henry Thoreau said, without injuring eternity. What we do resounds in eternity. We mess up here. It's amazing how that has a sound in the corridors of eternity. Time is nature's way of keeping everything from happening all at once. An unknown writer says. What happened to time as I close out? When as a child I laughed and wept, time crept. When as a youth I dreamed and talked, time walked. When I became a full-grown man, time ran. As later I grew older, time flew. Soon I shall find, while traveling on, time gone. Isn't that a sobering one? Moses' plea is that God's dealing would be different from the wilderness wandering generation. than it was for the Exodus generation. The long night of 38 years must now end. And truly, beloved, joy comes in the morning. And Moses asks God to restore his favor on the new generation of Israelites. Let your work be shown to your servants and your glorious power to their children. May the work of your hands be established, the work of our hands be established as your favor, as your blessing, as your grace rolls out upon our lives. Luther who says, this is the age of the half-read page and the quick hash and the mad dash, the bright night with the nerves tight and the plain hop with a brief stop, the lamp tan in short span, the big shot in good spot, and the brain strain and the heart pain and the cat naps till the spring snaps and the fun's done. And now Luther says, that was the poem that I just read. Now Martin Luther says, I have so much to do today that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer, just yanking us back to reality again as to what is really real and what really counts. May God bless you as you meditate on this psalm, encouraging us that as sands through the hourglass, we would make the days count. Not count the days, make the days count. May God bless you as you continue.